There's the hard war, hard tech component, and then there's the soft power, soft tech component. What have you learned about Hamas's cyber activity in what has been 48 hours already since the attack?
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Ed. It's incredibly early in this crisis, but we're seeing just the increased escalation over the last few days. We're now seeing deaths over 1,000, potentially over 1,600, hostages being taken, and the concern that there's going to be a second front, certainly on the northern side with Hezbollah. What American intelligence officials need to be asking right now, they are asking, is what direct role, if any, did Iran have in the supplying, the preparation, the encouraging of this attack? We know that Iran views its alliance with Hamas as a point of leverage, as it's looking to destabilize and derail the engagements with Israel and Saudi Arabia. And so certainly civilian casualties on both sides would obstruct any attempt toward a type of agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. So the tools available to all sides are not just kinetic. It's not just the fierce fighting that Galit just talked about. There are cyber weapons and cyber tools, which we know everybody has access to.
Let's talk about those cyber weapons, cyber tools already being deployed. You say it's very early days in the crisis. Already we've seen cyber attacks being aimed at both sides. Can you tell us sort of what these look like in the early iterations and whether they're going to be ramped up as days go forward?
It's hard to know where they will escalate to, but certainly right now we're seeing unofficial reports of DDoS attacks, the use of malware, defacement of websites. We saw back in 2011, 2012 that Iran used DDoS attacks against the United States financial sector. The capabilities of all nation states in cyber are enough. They're not necessarily as sophisticated as Russia or China, but we know that the capabilities exist and that if there is a war that is going to access all tools, that cyber could be used in lieu of kinetic weapons, but more likely in conjunction with kinetic weapons.
I mean, interestingly, Rob Joyce, Director of Cybersecurity over the National Security Agency, he's saying thus far cyber component hasn't been that significant. It has been more of these denial of service elements, but that they could ramp up. I'm interested as to how difficult it is to pass through who are hacktivists, where are they coming from, and what really the end goal is here.
Well, it's a great question because what we're looking at right now really is how can we be resilient. Rob is absolutely right. I mean, what we're seeing, we're not seeing any targeted attacks at this point. But what we want to be really aware of is how can we prepare? How can we be resilient against what could come? When we saw the imminence of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, CISA put out a Shields Up advisory to critical infrastructure companies to say, heighten your awareness, heighten your vigilance, lower the threshold for reporting. What we're talking about now isn't necessarily what we know to be coming, but the importance of being prepared, being resilient, and being vigilant as we create a more resilient infrastructure for the United States.
Kiersten, you're talking about preparedness. Yesterday, Professor Chuck Freilich of Columbia, former deputy national security advisor in Israel, said that this wasn't a lack of intelligence, it was a lack of imagination. That the security and intelligence forces just didn't think that something of that scale could happen because they couldn't imagine it. Put that in the cyber context for us. You seem to be suggesting that a lot of that competence and know-how would come from the Iran side or a third-party actor, not necessarily Hamas itself.
It's hard to know. Certainly Iran has these capabilities. And as I said, we've seen Iran use cyber capabilities. I think your point about failure of imagination is obviously...
Not my point.
Sorry.
Professor Chuck Freilich's point, yeah.
Brings us, unfortunately, back to 9/11 and what we look at as human nature. We often prepare for that which we know we can respond to. Our challenge is the ability to prepare for that which is more frightening, more devastating, more destructive. And so when we're preparing, we have to be thinking about how can cyber play a role in this and what do we need to be doing, again, to prevent, to prepare, and importantly, to be resilient.
You were with CISA through July of this year. I want to ask you about Palantir and the private-public relationship. There have been loads of questions posed about Palantir over the weekend. Do you have any experience you can draw on or opinion on the role that the private sector could play in the intelligence and cyberspace data related going forward?
One of the things that I was so pleased with and proud to be a part of at CISA and with the federal government is the improved relationship between industry and government in threat intelligence, in the ability to share information. The SolarWinds attack that happened back in 2020 was identified by the company FireEye. And the ability then for the private sector to share information with government, for government to do the same in real time, so that we can create not a complete threat intelligence picture, but certainly a more comprehensive one, so that coming together, industry and government can respond. We know that one entity can't respond and retaliate on its own, respond and react, that we've got to be able to work together.